Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
Another deep dive.
You know, we love to really dig into some really dense material.
Dense in a good way.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
we like to get into the weeds of really
Yeah.
interesting stuff. And today we're looking at something that I think is fascinating.
Fascinating.
It's this idea of whether there is something that links all religions together.
Oh, yeah.
And so to do that, we are going to look at the work of Frithjof Schuon, and specifically some excerpts that you sent me from his book, The Transcendent Unity of Religions.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, right? Because you sent me excerpts from the book, so we're looking at the preface, the introduction, and we're really trying to understand what is his main point.
Yeah, what's the core
What's the core?
of what he's trying to say?
Right. And I think the core of what he's trying to get at is that despite, all the diversity that we see in different religions,
Yeah,
all the different practices, all the different beliefs,
yeah.
there is a fundamental unity
A unity.
beneath the surface
Yeah.
of all these religious traditions.
So, I mean, he's not saying that all religions are the same, right? He's saying
Yeah.
that there's like a shared core to all these different religions.
Right.
So today we're going to kind of go deep into one of his main distinctions, which
Yeah.
is this idea of esoterism versus exoterism.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
And I think that is going to help us to see how all these different religions relate in a really fascinating new light.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because Schwann's whole perspective on this, this idea of there being a unity to all religions, really comes from a powerful experience he had
Right.
in his own life.
He talks about how after like a decade of studying Vedanta
Right.
in India, he just had this realization that it's not just like a base camp, like a starting point.
Like a jumping off point.
Yeah, like a jumping off point, but it was actually something much deeper and more profound. And it's not just...
And more universal, too.
Yeah, and more universal
Right.
than just India or just Vedanta.
Yeah, it's like, once he kind of got to a certain point
Yeah.
in his own study of Vedanta, it just kind of opened up
Yeah.
this whole realization that, hey, these themes, these ideas, these concepts,
Yeah.
they're not just limited to this one tradition.
Right.
They're all over the place. And he started seeing them everywhere,
Right.
in every religion he looked at.
Yeah. And he's saying that that's not just a coincidence, that there's some reason for that.
Right. It's not an accident. And he actually says it's because this kind of unity, this underlying essence, is grounded in man's inherent nature as related to his source.
So basically, like, everybody has this need to find meaning
Exactly.
and to connect to something greater
Right.
than themselves. And that is what's expressing itself in all these different religious traditions.
And that's what makes it universal.
Yeah.
It's not just, an accident or a coincidence.
So to kind of understand his approach here, he doesn't look at the religious landscape like we
Yeah.
typically do, right?
Right. He's not looking at it in terms of...
Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam.
Right. Those are all kind of our historical categories.
Yeah.
Right.
But instead,
Yeah.
he proposes this.
He proposes a different kind of division.
Different
Yeah.
division.
Totally.
Yeah, like a different way of categorizing it.
So think about it like this. He's saying, imagine there's a line,
Yeah.
a horizontal line that runs through all of these religions.
Okay.
So it's not separating them vertically.
It's cutting them in half.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's like each religion has an upper half and a lower half.
I like that.
Right.
Okay.
And so above the line, he puts what he calls esoterism.
Yeah.
And below the line, he puts exoterism.
So what does that mean?
Yeah, so esoterism is kind of like the inner dimension
Okay.
of religion. It's the more profound, the more mystical, the more philosophical
Okay.
kind of heart of religion. So
Yeah.
it's dealing with like the core universal truths,
Yeah.
the direct experience of the divine.
Okay.
Exoterism, on the other hand,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the outer layer. It's kind of like the more
Mhm.
accessible part. So
Yeah.
this is where you have like the specific doctrines, the rituals,
Huh.
the laws.
The laws, the moral codes.
Yeah, the moral codes, the community structures
Okay.
that make each religion unique
Yeah.
and kind of distinguish it from the others.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
And that's also what makes it accessible
Right.
to a wider group of people, right?
it's the more public facing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like the everyday religion that most people encounter.
Right.
Right.
So, I mean, I think the idea that, like, there's a common essence or a common thread through all religions isn't
Yeah.
entirely new, right? Like, other people have said that.
Yeah, other people have definitely kind of alluded to that idea.
But what's kind of unique about Schuon is how he defines that common essence. Exactly. Like, what is that core
Right.
that we're talking about?
Yeah, it's the nature of that essence And it's also how these two domains, the esoteric and the exoteric, how they relate to each other.
How do they work together?
Yeah, because a lot of people have said, yeah, there's a common thread.
Right.
But they haven't really explained how it works.
Yeah.
And Schuon really gets into the nuts and bolts.
The how, the why.
Yeah, he's like, here's how it actually functions.
Yeah.
And he does that through, a really interesting metaphysical perspective.
Yeah. So speaking of metaphysics, one of the things he talks about is that existence itself
Right.
and our cognition, our ability to know things, is graded
Yes.
with God at the top.
Right at the apex.
Right.
The top of the pyramid.
So how does this fit into
Yeah.
his view of religions?
So for him, this is a key point, right? That this
Yeah.
idea that reality
Right.
has these different layers.
Yeah.
And so when we understand the esoteric side of religion,
Yeah.
what religions are doing is connecting us to these different levels,
Yeah.
right? So the deeper the insight that
Yeah.
a religion offers,
Yeah.
the higher the level of reality it's helping us to touch,
Right.
to experience.
Yeah. And he contrasts this with the modern way of seeing things.
Exactly. And he even references Marcuse,
Yeah.
the philosopher who
Yeah.
wrote that book, One-Dimensional Man.
Yeah.
And this is a book that's really about how, modern society tends to flatten everything out
Yeah.
into a single dimension.
Reduce it all to the material.
Exactly. It reduces everything to the
Yeah.
measurable, to the quantifiable.
Right.
And it completely ignores these higher dimensions of reality.
Right. So he's saying that traditional societies
Right.
had an intuitive understanding
Right.
that deeper spiritual truths weren't just
Yeah.
ideas, they were actually...
Yeah. They weren't just abstract concepts.
Yeah.
It's not just philosophy. Right? It's something that actually transforms you.
Right. It changes your being.
Changes your being, changes your mode of knowing.
Yeah. It's like it changes how you relate to the world.
Exactly. And so for Schuon, this is a really important point.
Yeah.
Because, he sees that in traditional societies,
Mm-hmm.
there was this understanding
Yeah.
that deeper truths actually unlock deeper ways of knowing within people.
Right.
And this actually
Mhm.
elevates their whole being.
Right. It makes them more than just
Right.
a physical body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he says that this modern tendency
Yeah.
to reduce everything to the material,
Yeah.
to the measurable,
All physical.
makes it really hard
Yeah.
to grasp these higher dimensions of reality.
And therefore to grasp this unity
And therefore to grasp the unity.
of all religions.
Right, because the unity is in that higher dimension.
Right.
It's not down here in the material world.
Right. So the unity that he's talking about isn't just like,
Right.
we should all get along.
It's not just moral unity
Or even that we have the same
or theological unity.
ethical principles.
Right.
He calls it fundamentally metaphysical.
Right. It's metaphysical unity.
Yeah, meaning it's beyond like our
Exactly. It exists on a plane.
everyday physical world.
Yeah. That transcends our everyday world.
So it's not just about having the same ideas about God
Right.
or the same rituals or even the same ethical guidelines.
It's deeper than that.
It's a unity that exists on this transcendent level.
Right. And that makes it really hard to talk about because
Oh.
it's beyond our normal language.
Right.
Right. It's beyond our normal conceptual frameworks.
So he's saying it's really hard to describe directly.
Exactly.
And it makes it a challenge for most people to even grasp.
Yeah, because you can't capture this unity
Right.
perfectly in any single doctrine or belief system.
It's kind of ineffable.
Exactly. It's like trying to explain a
Right.
four-dimensional object using only three-dimensional language.
Right. You can't fully do it.
You can't fully do it. You can give hints.
Right.
You can give analogies,
Yeah.
but you can't fully capture it.
So for those who do grasp it,
Right.
it's like the problem of these different religions clashing.
It dissolves.
Yeah, and it just kind of goes away.
It's not a problem anymore.
But for most people who don't perceive this transcendent reality,
Right.
the differences just remain very real.
Yeah, they're still stuck in the concrete.
Yeah.
Right. They're still stuck in the specific forms.
Yeah, so he's saying like the generic feels too abstract.
Right.
And the concrete is what feels real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so hard for people to really grasp
Right.
this unity.
And to kind of understand why it's so difficult
Yeah.
to like extend our understanding
Right.
to these deeper truths.
Right.
He uses this analogy about how a baby understands
Yes.
the word mother.
Oh, that's a great one.
So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So when a baby first learns the word mother,
Yeah.
they associate it with the immediate physical presence of their mother, right?
Right.
It's like if the mother's not there
Yeah.
In front of them, she doesn't exist.
Yeah, she's not a concept.
Right, she's not an abstract idea.
She's just that physical being.
She's just that physical being.
Yeah,
Right.
but as the child grows, right.
Their understanding of mother expands beyond that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It goes beyond the physical.
Yeah. They understand that even when she's not there,
Right.
she still exists.
She still exists.
Right.
It becomes a more abstract concept.
And then he makes this connection to the biblical statement, no man cometh unto the Father but by me.
Right. And this is where things get really interesting.
Right.
Because for someone with a more esoteric understanding,
Yeah.
my in that statement refers to the logos.
Okay.
And you know, you can think of the logos as this universal divine principle,
Okay.
right? The underlying reason,
Yeah.
the divine intelligence that governs everything.
Okay.
But for someone with a more exoteric view,
Right.
who might not be as comfortable with those abstract ideas,
Yeah.
me is very closely tied to the historical figure of Jesus,
Right.
right? So if you try to separate the word from that concrete image,
Yeah.
it loses its meaning for them. It
Right.
loses its power.
So a less developed ability for spiritual abstraction makes
Right.
the esoteric interpretation just really difficult to grasp.
Yeah, it's like they're speaking different languages
Yeah.
almost.
And he also talks about this idea of purely intellectual knowledge.
Oh, yes. This is a fascinating concept.
What is that exactly?
So he describes this as a kind of knowledge that goes beyond
Okay.
both our normal reasoning
Okay.
and even ordinary faith.
Okay, so it's not just like...
Right. It's not just sitting down and figuring things out.
Right.
But
And it's not just belief in...
it's not just believing what you're told.
Yeah.
Right.
What somebody told you.
It's something deeper than that.
Yeah.
And he says that it's not personal to us either.
Oh.
It's not just our own little private knowledge.
It's more universal.
It's universal. It's almost divine,
oh.
right? And he says it springs from what he calls pure intelligence.
Pure intelligence.
Yeah,
And this is something that's direct.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's immediate.
It's not like
It's not discursive.
a logical process. Right. So it's not like a step-by-step process
Yeah,
of reasoning.
yeah.
It's just a direct intuition of truth.
An intuition.
An intuition.
Okay.
And because it's so direct,
Yeah,
it goes beyond all the limitations of our normal thought.
right.
It even goes beyond faith as we normally understand it.
So he's saying that there's a difference between metaphysical knowledge
Right.
that comes from this intuition
Right.
and religious knowledge that comes from revelation.
Exactly.
Yeah,
What's
got
the
it.
difference? So revelation is like the word of God,
Okay.
right? Communicated to humanity
Okay.
in a way that we can understand.
Okay.
So it's divine in origin, but it's expressed in human terms.
Okay.
Intellectual intuition, on the other hand, is like a more immediate
Yeah.
participation in divine knowledge itself. It's like
Yeah.
you're not separate
Yeah.
from the reality that you're knowing.
So it's more experiential
Exactly.
rather than just receiving.
Yeah, faith is often about accepting revealed truths,
Right.
right, based on authority or tradition.
Yeah.
Whereas intellectual intuition is like a direct experience.
So he's saying faith is more passive?
Yeah, it's more passive.
Or intellectual intuition is more active?
More active.
Yeah.
And this intellectual intuition leads to what he calls absolute metaphysical certitude.
Certitude meaning like...
Yeah, like certainty.
It's certainty,
Right.
right?
Because in the intellect, the knower and the known are one.
Oh.
Right? So there's no separation.
So it's like a direct...
Like you are what you know.
knowing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads to absolute certainty.
Now, to kind of illustrate the difference between this metaphysical understanding
Right.
and like a theological understanding,
Right.
he uses this analogy of light and colors.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
Can you break that down?
Okay, so imagine you have pure light, right?
Ah.
In its essence, it's colorless,
It's just pure brightness.
just pure brightness.
Okay.
And so for Schuon, this is like metaphysical knowledge,
Okay.
right? It's seeing that basic undifferentiated reality.
Okay.
Now, different religions might come along and say, oh, well, light is red,
Or light is green.
or light is green.
Right.
And these are like theological viewpoints.
Right. So they're all looking at the same thing,
Right.
but they're identifying it with a particular quality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're all correct in saying that light is not darkness,
Right.
but they become limited
Yeah.
when they insist that the essence of light is only that one particular color.
Right.
Right?
So he's saying that our everyday rational thinking can't
Yeah.
really get to that truth.
Right.
Why is that?
Because he says that reason
Yeah.
operates in the realm of like general ideas and concepts.
Concepts.
Right.
Yeah.
But transcendent truth is beyond those.
Right. It's beyond concept.
It's beyond concepts.
Yeah.
Right? And so when we try to use those rational frameworks,
Yeah.
like, the philosophy of Aristotle or scholastic theology,
Yeah.
to try to express this higher knowledge,
Yeah.
he thinks it actually kind of weakens.
He diminishes it.
It diminishes, it weakens the integrity of the doctrine.
So even though metaphysics uses arguments that sound philosophical,
They're not the same thing.
he's saying it's not the same.
Yeah.
So he says metaphysical propositions are symbolical
Right.
and descriptive.
They're using
What does that mean?
They're using those rational concepts
Mm.
as symbols
Yeah.
to point towards a kind of knowledge that has a much greater certainty than anything we can get through our senses or through reason.
So it's using those familiar tools,
That's right.
but not in their normal way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like using a hammer to open a can of soup.
Right.
It's not the intended use,
Right.
but you can kind of make it work.
And the goal is to awaken that knowledge.
Right.
That's already within us.
That's already there.
Right.
Latent unconscious.
He also talks about how these seemingly contradictory statements that we find in different religions
Right.
can coexist. So, in some traditions, you have people saying, I am God.
Right.
And in Christianity, you have Jesus saying,
Right.
I and the Father are one.
Exactly.
So how does he reconcile those things?
So he says that these contradictions often arise because each statement is trying to describe a different facet of a single underlying reality
Okay.
that's too vast and too complex
Yeah.
to be captured in any one perspective.
It's like describing...
It's like describing a diamond, right?
Right.
You could describe its shape from one angle.
Yeah.
You could describe its color from another angle.
Yeah.
And both descriptions might sound different.
Yeah.
But they're both true aspects of the same diamond.
Right.
Right.
And he even says that you have contradictions within a single
Exactly.
religion sometimes.
And he's not saying that this means that the religion is wrong.
Right.
He's saying it's the result
Yeah.
of different thinkers trying to grasp the same truth.
From different perspectives.
From different perspectives.
Yeah. And he uses Al-Ghazali's parable of the blind man and the elephant to illustrate this.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
So for those who haven't heard that...
So basically, it's a story about these blind men
Yeah.
who each encounter an elephant,
Right.
but they each touch a different part of the elephant.
Right.
And so one touches the trunk and thinks it's like a snake.
Yeah.
One touches the leg and thinks it's like a tree trunk.
Right.
And so they're all kind of arguing about what an elephant is.
Right.
But none of them have the full picture.
And Schuon's point is...
And so Schuon's point is that we often do this with religion.
Right.
Right? We get caught up in our own limited perspective.
Yeah.
And we think that's the whole truth.
Yeah, we miss the big picture.
We miss the big picture.
Yeah, and he even mentions that the Hindu saint Sri Ramakrishna used this parable to kind of caution against dogmatic exclusiveness.
It's like, don't get too caught up in your own little interpretation.
You think you have a monopoly on truth.
Right? There are other ways of seeing things.
Yeah, and he offers another example.
He does.
Like describing an object by its shape or its material.
Or how many there are.
Yeah, how many there are.
Or how much it weighs.
Right, each of those is accurate, but it doesn't give you the whole...
Right, it's a partial description.
Right, it's a partial description.
It's not wrong.
Yeah.
But it's not complete.
Yeah, so he's saying reality is like this elephant.
Exactly.
Yeah, we need to kind of step back.
You need to see the whole thing.
And see all the different perspectives.
Right.
So let's get into his understanding of exoterism and some of the limitations of that.
Right.
So he says that the exoteric viewpoint is primarily concerned with...
the well-being of the individual.
Yeah, the well-being of the individual.
And not just like in this life.
Yeah, but like ultimate well-being.
Ultimate well-being.
Yeah, like salvation.
Salvation.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And he says that the exoteric truth is limited by that very limitation of its goal.
Right.
So because its goal is just individual salvation.
Yeah. And because it's focused on a specific tradition.
Yeah, it's not focused on the universal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it has to kind of emphasize the uniqueness and even the exclusivity of its own path.
So it's kind of forced to exclude other things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he gives the example of the doctrine of the one true church.
Right.
Right. So from an exoteric perspective, that might require excluding the full validity of other religion.
Right.
Because if you start saying, well, there's truth everywhere.
Yeah, then you're undermining your own authority.
Right. Then it kind of dilutes the commitment
Right.
to your own tradition.
Yeah, it might lead to indifference.
Right.
Which is kind of...
Which is counterproductive to that goal
All right.
of salvation.
Yeah, so it's like the exoteric view is...
It is.
like by necessity.
It has to be.
Kind of limited.
Right.
Yeah.
And he also talks about how, esoterists understand exoterism.
Yeah.
But exoterists often don't understand esoterism.
And that might be okay.
Right. And he even says that they might have a right not to understand it.
Right.
Because they're focused on...
because their focus is different.
A different thing.
Right. Their focus is on their own tradition.
Right.
And they might not even see the need
Yeah.
for a more universal perspective.
Right. But he then criticizes the way in which accusations against esotericism often arise.
Yes. He says that sometimes it's done in a very dishonest way.
Right.
Right?
It's like, they're misrepresenting.
They're distorting.
Yeah, they're distorting.
They're making unfair accusations.
Yeah.
And he sees that as a really serious mistake.
Yeah, and he gives the examples of al-Hallaj and Christ to illustrate this.
Both of whom were persecuted by the religious authorities of their time.
Yeah.
For, expressing truths that were deemed heretical. So he's saying just because you don't understand something doesn't give you the right...
It doesn't justify persecution.
Yeah.
It doesn't justify violence.
All right.
Right.
And he also talks about conversion.
Yeah.
And he uses this example.
Of Sundar Singh.
Yeah, of Sundar Singh.
Right.
Who came from a Sikh background.
Right.
And was very opposed to Christianity.
He was. He was a fierce opponent of Christianity.
And then he had this sudden... conversion. And it wasn't because of intellectual arguments.
It was a mystical experience.
It was a vision of Christ.
Yeah, he had a vision of Christ.
And he didn't even really know much about Christian doctrine.
Right. He didn't even think about it.
At that point.
And
Schuon makes a comparison to
St. Paul.
St. Paul, who also had
this sudden conversion experience.
So he's saying there's this general principle that somebody who really hates a religion...
Yeah, who's very opposed to it, might be on the verge of converting.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a paradoxical...
It is a paradox.
idea.
Right.
And he also says that grace in conversion usually touches those who lack.
Who lack its equivalent.
Yeah.
In their own tradition.
So if you already have...
If you already have that depth.
That spiritual depth.
Right.
You're not going to be swayed by...
the doctrines of another religion.
The doctrines of another religion.
Aren't going to be persuasive to you.
Yeah. So he's saying those people are kind of unconvertible.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless it's through like some kind of collective psychism.
Right.
Like a mass movement or something.
Yeah. But even then, it's grace. That's
doing the real work.
And this kind of aligns with his idea.
Exactly.
The divine will
is distributing the truth in different forms.
In different forms to different people.
Right.
So the fact that we have these different exoteric religions...
It's not an accident.
It's not an accident.
It's in accordance with the divine will.
It's all part of the plan.
It's all part of the plan.
Yeah.
And he says that this relativity